How many of you know about backyard tigers? Just saw a thing about a note from a friend of mine who lives on Tucson, saying that the city of Tucson declared a mountain lion in a backyard to be a public safety threat. My friend said, "Do you think?" Did you know that there are more tigers in American backyards than there are in the wild in India? Think about that. Why do people want a tiger as a pet? Now obviously they get them when they're tiger cubs and they're cute and they're cuddly and they're playful, but the tiger doesn't stay small forever, and so then the tiger grows up, and in fact I saw one thing that said there are in fact more backyard tigers in Texas than in India. And this in some places has become even a problem. Texas and Florida, for example, have some of the more permissive laws, and so people have these animals, but why do people want a tiger in the backyard? What is the attraction to it? Why are we attracted to these animals? I mean, it's dangerous, it's powerful, they're beautiful. If you've ever seen, they'll often have a tiger here at the Sacramento Zoo. Gorgeous animals, and when we watch these animals, part of us sits and are in awe of these animals. And so on one hand, we're attracted and we want it. And in fact, the idea of having a tiger or a lion as a pet just captivates and grabs and holds something in us. The book of Isaiah says that the prophet Isaiah went into the temple one day, and this is what he saw. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings, and with 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory." Now, if you can imagine how we respond when seeing a tiger, or if you're living out in the foothills and you go into your backyard one day, and in the backyard you discover a mountain lion, I mean, what would you do? On one hand, you would probably lock the door as if the mountain lion would turn the doorknob. But you would look at, you might get a gun if you have a gun, but on the other hand, you would probably sit in the backyard and you're sitting in the house and look through the window. You probably couldn't take your eyes off it. On one hand, you would be captivated and you'd be in awe of the presence of this mountain lion in your backyard. On the other hand, you would be terrified of it. Now Isaiah goes into the temple and he sees these angels. And I'm sure our experience with a tiger or a mountain lion is just a small bit of what he experienced, because in these angels he saw beauty and power and majesty that completely both captivated him and terrified him. But what's the difference between us seeing a tiger or a lion? These are, as we all know, animals, and while they're smart and crafty and powerful and swift, we also know they can't fire a gun, they can't read a book. We, in a sense, are their masters. But to see these angels, the prophet knows that on one hand, their beauty and their power, everything about them he falls flat on his face. Because he also knows that they are smart and wise and intelligent, far smarter and more perceptive than he is. And what these angels do is cry to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty." He is not just holy, which means separate, but in Hebrew they multiply the words to give emphasis. He's holy, holy, holy. Yet the whole earth is full of his glory. In fact, we see his glory all all the time. You can see his glory, as I mentioned, in nature, in a sunset, or in the sky, or in one of our amazing national parks. You can see his glory when someone does a job well. And no matter what kind of work you do, you have coworkers, and if you work together, and you know the workers that are glorious because they do their jobs. I'm looking at Raynette and thinking of a teacher. When a lesson just kind of comes together and all the children get it, it's glorious. And I'm looking at Reggie and Cynthia. They work in the government, and when a program that's designed perhaps to meet the needs of the people, when that program comes together, it's glorious. And they probably work most of their time on things that don't come together, and you struggle. But those moments when it happens, you say, this is why I come to work. And when I'm thinking about Jack, and probably when it's getting towards late in the summer, early in the fall, and the grain is ripening, and he looks out on the field and it's full of rice, he would probably say, that's glorious. And when the harvest comes in and it's been a good crop, you say, that's glorious. Or when you have company coming over to your house and you set the table just right. Now, Lily isn't here today, so I can talk about her. If you go to Lily's house, you'll notice that the dining room table is always set, right? And I remember when Earl was in his last days in the front room, Lily was telling me about someone who came in and kind of moved some stuff on the table and sat down, and Lily kind of gave him a look like, you don't do that in my house. The table is set and you leave it there. Because the idea is that the table is set, and then if you have company coming, maybe you prepare a dish and you follow a recipe and you put it together. But even though you're following the recipe, you're not sure how it will turn out. But if the table is set, and if the food turns out right, and if the company gets along, your evening can be glorious. Sometimes, and I'm looking at Jay and Liz, you got these little boys that you're chasing around and they squabble and fight, but you get to the end of the day and they look up at you in that certain way and you see glory in their face. And you say, on one hand, the earth is so mundane and ordinary, but every now and then, glory breaks through and makes us gasp. That's why people keep tigers in the backyard. They want they want to see glory. But we all know that a tiger in a chain link fence in the backyard is nothing near the glory of a tiger in the jungle doing what tigers do. Yet, we don't get too close. The mountain lion in your backyard, you're going to call animal control right away. You're going to get your gun. You're going to stay in the house. But you're going to keep your eye on it. You're terrified, but it's glorious. And even then you have the sense that even by that mountain lion being in your backyard, its glory is diminished. Because mountain lions weren't made for backyards. In the book of Revelation, this emotional response to glory is complex. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth and made of goat hair. And the whole moon was turned blood red. Often in the Bible, when they talk about glory breaking in, there are these images. And in biblical studies, we call it apocalyptic literature. Because the world is torn apart. The stars in the sky fell to the earth as figs drop from the fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountain. And they called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it? This is an image of terrible glory. But what do we do with glory? I'm going to have a couple of weeks vacation, and I think we changed our plans. We were going to go up to Yellowstone and Glacier, but that got a little ambitious for us, so we're dialing it back. But we'll probably go up to Yosemite or Sequoia and out to the ocean, and I'll take my camera, and I'll take lots of pictures because there'll be this glory, and I want to try and capture it and put it in a picture so that I can put it on my phone and put it on my computer screen and see it again. What do we do with glory? I remember the song from the 70s, If I Could Put Time in a Bottle. That song's about glory because when we see it, we want to capture it. And so if you have that child who's making you crazy, one day you want to kill the kid, but the next day you look at the kid and think, if I could take this moment and put it in a bottle, I would take it out the other days, I want to kill the kid. Glory. But what we do with glory is we say, I want to reproduce it. So we made the recipe once and we set the table once and the dinner party was glorious. And so what do we try to do? Well, I'll do the same thing again. And it doesn't work. And in fact, we see this all over. When we see glory, we want to capture it. We want to bottle it. We want to box it. In fact, so much of what we do that's glorious, we think, I did this once, I can make $1 million from it, or I can, and so this is what we do with glory. Story in the New Testament of Peter, James, and John with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Glory comes down, and what's the first thing out of Peter's mouth? Let's make some tents so we can stay here. Peter, you don't understand glory. It's a gift. You can't put time in a bottle. You can't put a tiger in your backyard and not take away its glory. You can't turn it into commerce or royalty. Here's the thing about glory. Glory is power, and as soon as we get an insight into what that power and glory might become, we want to employ it and take what is wild and domesticate it and make it our slave. So the truth is, there are hundreds of backyard tigers that are, and you can find YouTubes of this, they're starving, they're not properly cared for, they don't get the proper attention. You can go to the zoo and see animals that are as well cared for as you can imagine, but one of my favorite animals to see in the Sacramento Zoo are the orangutans. And they look so human, and the males have that huge face. But every time I see the orangutan, I'm sad. Because just looking at him, he's glorious. But we have diminished his glory and made the little bit of glory he maintains an entertainment and an amusement for us at our convenience. This is what we do. Amazing article last week in New York Times Magazine. Man he's really talking about glory and lost glory in this world. He's talking about a time when he visited a nursing home when he was a young boy with his father. In a bed next to the woman my father and I were visiting was another woman. And if you've ever spent much time visiting nursing homes, you know this dynamic. In a bed next to the woman my father and I were visiting was another woman. A woman who struck me as impossibly ancient and decrepit. And who kept trying to requisition my father's attention away from her neighbor. She was deranged with senescence and loneliness and other unknowable sorrows remote from my childhood understanding. The woman we were visiting kept telling us to pay her no attention, and she never got any visitors and was merely starved for attention. Some of you know Dale Menting. Dale was such a faithful visitor of Elmer, and Dale visited Elmer in all of these nursing homes Elmer was in. And even after Elmer would leave the nursing home, Dale couldn't bear to no longer visit the people that were Elmer's neighbors, so he still does it today. But you get that sense when you go into a nursing home of glory lost. At one point, driven by frustration at my father's insistence on returning his attention to the woman we were visiting, the neighbor grabbed him by the wrist with one hand and with the other pushed aside her bedsheet and pulled her nightdress high over her waist. For a brief moment before my father drew his free arm around me and pulled my face into the shelter of his chest, I glimpsed the wispy vision of her ancient vagina. I remember very clearly the tone in which she then said these words, "Look at what happened to me." I hear it now, that high, beseeching voice, thin and penetrating as a blade. My father later spoke to me about what happened. I don't remember it. I was in shock, I think, as much as from the fleeting revelation of the old woman's private misery as of her private anatomy. I think of the experience now as a strange intrusion into my happy innocence, a weird emissary of the suffering and senselessness of an adult world, a world of aging and grief that lay beyond the little shelter of my childhood. What an image. But it's there. This woman in a bed who is crying for just someone to pay her any attention at all goes to such extremes. And then she says, "Look at what happened to me." She was never born to be this. But there she was, and she's drowning of loneliness and senility. And what's heartbreaking about the story is all of us know this story in other ways. Glory is so common. You can find it in a dish of ice cream. You can find it blazing in the sky at sunset. You can find it in a good meal, in a child's nature, in a beautiful face, in a cool breeze, that delta breeze sometimes when it's been hot all afternoon, and you open up the door and that delta breeze comes in and it's just glorious. But 100% of people die, 100% of people age, 100% of human culture is lost. Why is this world such this strange mixture of glory and decay and misery? And we can't do anything about it. The story of the Bible is the story of God's rescue mission. God wanted this world to be a place of glory. And look at what we've done to it. And we're like the woman, we have to scream, "Look at what's happened to me." Whether it's by old age, whether it's by illness, whether it's by despair, whether it's by broken relationships, it happens to all of us. So God rescues them from Egypt, and He, the source of glory, wants to live with them, undoing the rebellion. So they get set up with the tabernacle. And the mission grinds to a halt when Moses has gone too long, and they say, "Let's put up a golden calf." That golden calf epitomizes us with trying to capture glory. God is too wild. God is too scary. Let's make a God that is small and that can be manipulated by us. Let's put the tiger in the backyard. But as soon as you see that tiger pacing beside that chain link fence, you know we've taken its glory. You can't put God in your backyard. People don't want to live with God. They want a backyard tiger. So Moses chiseled out 2 stones like the first one and went up to Mount Sinai early in the morning as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hand. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him, proclaimed his name, the Lord, Yahweh. And he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshipped. Lord, he said, if I have found favor in your eyes, then let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our wickedness and our sin, and take us as your inheritance. Then the Lord said, I am making a covenant with you before all your people. I will do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. He promises them glory. Then Moses came down from Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hand, and he was not aware that his face was radiant, because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. There it is! We want the tiger in the backyard, we want God in a little box, but even his reflection, like the reflection of the sun on the moon that we see in the sky, in Moses' face, and they run from him. But Moses called to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near, and he gave them all the commandments the Lord had given him on Sinai. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face, and whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak with him, he removed the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites what he commanded. It's funny because the Hebrew uses the word for horn when it talks about the change that had undergone Moses. And this led to a long history of making statues of Moses with horns on his head. And then other interpreters said, no, they're horns of light, so this one has horns of light. And whether there were horns or horns of light or a radiant face or what it was, whatever it was, being with the Lord changed Moses. And it changed Moses in a way that profoundly disturbed the people, such that Moses veiled his face from then on so that no one would see him. Because he bothered children and made his brother run away from him. But whenever he came to God, the veil came off. And Moses and God saw each other face to face. It strikes me that at that point, Moses had no more intimate friend in his life than God himself, because only God would see his face. What we want, however, is something more like Chuck E. Cheese. We want something that will clap, something that will produce, something that will stay safely on stage and not get too messed up or involved in my life. And so we put tigers in the backyard and we put Chuck E. Cheese in front of our children. It is the golden calf. The Apostle Paul looks at this and says, now if the ministry that brought death, which was engraved in letters on stone, came with glory, so that the Israelites could not look steadily on the face of Moses because of its glory, transitory though it was, will not the ministry of the Spirit be more glorious? If the ministry that brought condemnation was glorious, how much more glorious is the ministry that brought righteousness? For what was glorious has no glory now in comparison with its surpassing glory. And if it was transitory, came with glory, how much greater is the glory that will last? Paul then goes on to talk about what happened with Moses' face. Now, for many years the translation talked about the glory fading. But what was interesting about that was that in none of the Jewish tradition did they have Moses' glory fade. Recently, a scholar looked at that and noted some of the differences in translation. And his assertion is that what the argument that Paul is making here is basically this. The glory of the old covenant was like Moses' face that had to stay veiled in the law. But the glory of Jesus is opposite of that. Because Jesus came with a glory not of horns of light, but with horns of love. He acted in a way that seemed opposite of how a new Moses was supposed to behave. While he did wonders, it was exactly the kind of way that the Creator God shares glory in humility and with the relational polarity of your well-being at my expense. If you go outside in the evening and you see a glorious sunset, did you pay for it? Did you only get to see the sunset if someone comes down from the sky and says, slide your credit card here and I'll show you the rest of the sunset? Is that how a sunset works? Or when you see a glorious sunset in the sky, what do? Don't you say, call whoever's in the house, say, hey, come out here, look at this. Why do you do that? Because glory shared is glory multiplied. And so as God tried to show himself to the Israelites, they ran from him. And so God said, I need to come to them in a way that they won't run from me. I need to come to them in humility. When God shows you a sunset, does he say, I did that? Or does he just give it to you? God shares glory in humility and with the relational polarity of your well-being at my expense. The Gospel of John calls Jesus' hour of glorification the time when he was hung on a cross. Like the revelation of the woman's private misery through her private anatomy, Jesus revealed our barbarity and our inability to face glory without destroying it, without destroying us through his public misery and our public exposure of his anatomy. Why is it Jesus hangs naked on a cross? We put him there to shame him. We put him there to take away his glory. We thought if he refused to become a backyard tiger, we would have to put him to death. A few years ago, a guy had all kinds of animals in his backyard. 7 tigers, a lion, all kinds of animals. The authorities were finally bringing him up on charges of animal cruelty because you can only imagine what it would cost to keep 7 tigers and a lion just to feed them. And he didn't have enough money. So what did he do? He killed himself right after releasing all the animals into the neighborhood. Jesus comes in humility, and we brutalize him. And the Gospel of John says, this is his moment of glory. And you say, why is that glorious? Us hanging him naked on a tree, cruelly killing him publicly. Because it shows his love. If we couldn't tame Jesus, we must kill him, like we do with meager tigers and lions. You see, we are keepers of tigers who destroy them out of a cheap imitation of love. In our attempt to possess glory, it is diminished and destroyed, turning beauty into misery. Probably this week or next week, I'll go to Yosemite. And what will they tell me right when I get to the gate about bears? Do not feed the bears. Why do I want to feed the bears? Why is it so instinctive? I want that bear to come up to me. When I've camped there before, you see a bear walk across your path, and it's glorious. And if I put a little food out, the bear will come. The forest ranger will tell me, a fed bear is a dead bear, because I can't handle glory. And so when Jesus comes, this is how we treat him. Jesus came not to dazzle us, but to be our victim on our behalf. He lets us cage him as he is in the same moment suffering on our behalf. The product of this is the resurrection, where a new, more glorious, imperishable revelation is begun. He then invites us to live into his story, to be the caged tiger for the world, to live your well-being at my expense, to trust the presence of the Spirit that looks as unlike a glowing face as Jesus' naked body did on a cross, but through which greater glory is revealed. Why do Christians do this strange thing about this meal? Of course, last month we couldn't have enough juice to feed everyone, so Carmen poured plenty, so we'll be okay this week. Why do we celebrate this meal? You say, what's glorious about this bread? It was bought at Rayleigh's or Bel Air, and they chopped it up, and they put it in a dish, and we're going to pass it out. Is there anything glorious about this bread? But you look at it and say, if you believe, this bread is glory. Because when I see this bread, and when I touch this bread, and when I taste this bread, this man who was glorious left his glory behind and came in our midst, and we brutalized him. And there on the cross he says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. And when we look at this bread, we say it's glorious because we say, he did this for me. And that changes me, that moves me, that motivates me. And that makes me say, I want to be glorious like Jesus was. Do I shine? Am I glowing? Do I have a horn? No. The same glory Jesus had, he says, follow me and be glorious like I am. Eat my body, drink my blood. Learn to love, because I have loved you. On the night in which he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. And he said, this is my body broken for you. Whenever you eat this, remember me.